A warm good morning, children. This is the second video lesson on the explanation part of your third lesson, deep water. In the first video lesson, we have discussed the reasons behind Douglas's aversion towards water and also the misadventure that happened with him at YMCA pool. And in this video lesson, we are going to discuss the after effects of his misadventure at the YMCA pool. How did it affect his life as a whole? And if you don't have watched the first part, subscribe the channel, press the bell icon, watch the first part and come back. Now let us move.
Okay, we can start from here. Water that had a dirty yellow tinge to it. Tinge here means color. So he could see only a yellowish water around him. Then I grew panicky. Panicky here means state of panic. State of become panic or fearful. Fear is panic. I reached up as if to grab a rope and my hands clutched only at water. He wanted to grab a rope somewhere in the water, but he could clutch only water because he was surrounded by water. I was suffocating. I tried to yell, no sound came out. So he felt a suffocation. He wanted to yell, he wanted to scream, he wanted to cry, but he couldn't. Then my eyes and nose came out of the water, but not my mouth. And when he came up at the top of the water, only his eyes and nose could come out. His mouth couldn't. So he couldn't cry out. He went down again. Look at the next paragraph. I flailed at the surface of the water. Flailed here means wave vigorously. A vigorous attempt to swim towards the edge of the pool, but he couldn't. And what happened was he swallowed water and choked it. That stopped his breathing. I tried to bring my legs up, but they hung as dead weights. That was his second attempt. When he failed to flail his hands and legs, then he tried to beat with his legs, but his legs were remained something like hung like dead weights. They were paralyzed and rigid. He couldn't make them move. A great force was pulling me under. He felt like that. An unseen force that pulling him downwards. Then he screamed. But only the water heard me. I had started on the long journey back to the bottom of the pool. So, yet again, he started his long journey down the pool. Why it is long journey? Because already he said the 9 feet seemed 90. Look at the next paragraph. I struck at the water as I went down. While he was drowning, he was striking with his hands to come up, but expending my strength as one in nightmare flights, an irresistible force, But his attempt were remained futile, something like a fearful dream at night. He was fighting with a irresistible force. That was like he felt. Then I had I had lost all my breath. I had lost all my breath. My lungs ached. My head throbbed. Throb here means that beating, started beating like heart. I was getting dizzy. He became dizzy, unconscious, starting the state of oblivion. And but I remembered the strategy. Yet he could able to remember his strategy, remember his plan, and I would spring from the bottom of the pool and come like a cork to the surface. That was his strategy, that was his plan. Once he reached at the bottom of the pool, he would make a jump towards upwards and come like a cork. That was his strategy. To the surface, I would lie flat on the water, strike out with my arms, and thrash with my legs. Then he would use his legs and hands to swim. Then I would get to the edge of the pool and be safe. Thus, he could reach at the edge of the pool and hold somewhere there, and he would be safe. That was his plan. Look at the next paragraph. I went down, down endlessly. I opened my eyes, nothing but water with a yellow glow, a yellow radiance. That was the only thing he could see around him. Dark water that one could not see through. Later, the yellowish water turned into something dark that he couldn't see through. Next paragraph. And then sheer stark terror seized me. Then a firm and an emphatic terror that seized him. That knows no understanding, terror that knows no control, terror that no one can understand who has not experienced it. So, this is the terror that he felt. Only those people who have experienced such a dying experience, dying terror, only can understand this terror. That is what Douglas says. Then I was shrieking underwater. He was screaming, he was crying underwater. I was paralyzed underwater and stiff. He was paralyzed, stiff, and he was shrieking, he was screaming, rigid with fear. Then his body and mind became rigid, stiff with fear. Even the screams in my throat were frozen. No screams that came out because they have frozen in his throat. Only my heart and pounding in my head said that I was still alive. Pounding here means the throbbing. The throbbing head and the beating heart told him that he was alive. Come to the next paragraph. And then, in the midst of the terror, came a touch of reason. I must remember to jump when I hit the bottom. While he was drowning, yet again, the plan, the strategy came back to his mind, and his plan was to jump the moment he reached at the bottom. At last, I felt the tiles under me. My toes reached out as if to grab them. I jumped with everything I had. Let us go and watch how did he do it. Next paragraph. But the jump made no difference. The water was still around me. I looked for ropes, ladders, water wings. Nothing could be seen anywhere. Nothing but water. He could see only water there. A mass of yellow water held me. A stark terror that caught a strong hold on him. Like a great charge of electricity, he compared it with a great charge of electricity, a great shock for him, the terror that struck his entire mind and body. I shook and trembled with fright. Really, this is what happened. He completely he was shaken and trembled with the terror, the horror, the fright, the fear. My arms wouldn't move, my legs wouldn't move. I tried to call for help, to call for my mother. Nothing happened. All these things he wanted to do, but nothing could happen at that moment. He was helpless. He was overpowered by the pulling power of water. Come to the next page. And then, strangely, there was light. He felt that. I was coming out of the awful yellow water. Awful here means that causing terror. Terrorful water. At least my eyes were. He felt some tinge of light in his eyes. My nose was almost out too. He couldn't breathe. Then I started down a third time. Now he started drowning for the third time. I sucked for air and got water. And at this time, when he sucked, he tried to get air. Instead of air, he got water. The yellowish light was going out. Now that yellowish light was completely going out from his eyes. Then all effort ceased. Ceased here means stopped. I relaxed. Even my legs felt limp. It felt weighty or dead. That felt limp, looking very stiff. He couldn't control his legs, and blackness swept over my brain. A kind of lightlessness that came over his brain, a kind of blackout, unconsciousness, oblivion that came in his head. It wiped out fear, but he felt that blackness wiped out his fear. It wiped out terror. There was no more panic. When that unconscious state started, he felt relaxed. There was no more fear. There was no more horror. There was no more terror. It was quiet and peaceful. He felt that everything was quiet. All is well, he felt. Nothing to be afraid of. And this is nice, to be drowsy. Drowsy means sleepy. To be sleepy. To go to sleep. No need to jump. Too tired to jump. And no need is there to jump. And he is too tired to do that. It is nice to be carried gently and to float along in space. Tender arms around me, tender arms like mother's. Now I must go to sleep. He felt that his mother's hands that carries him away. Look at the next paragraph. I crossed it to oblivion. Oblivion here means unconsciousness. Unconsciousness. and the curtain of life fell. He thought that his life was over. The final bell was blown. Look at the next paragraph. The next I remember, I was lying on the stomach beside the pool, vomiting. That was the next thing that he could remember after this adventurous incident. The chap that threw me in was saying, but I was only fooling. He was excusing after throwing him into the deep end of the water. He was now telling that he was just kidding. Kidding with the life of Douglas. And someone said, the kid nearly died. Be all right now. Let us carry him to the locker room. Then Douglas was carried to the locker room. Next paragraph. Several hours later, I walked home. I was weak and trembling. He was completely shaking. He couldn't come out of this misadventure. I shook and cried when I lay on my bed. And I could not eat that night. For days, a haunting fear was in my heart. Then it turned out to be a haunting fear, a permanent fear in his mind. The slightest exertion upset me. Exertion means any physical or mental effort to do something that really began to upset him and making me wobbly. Wobbly means that unsteady. It became unsteady in the knees and sick of my stomach. Some problems with his stomach also after this incident. Look at the next paragraph. I never went back to the pool. I feared water. I avoided it whenever I could. Then after this mishap, he never went back to the pool or any other water bodies. He stopped it there because the terror that remained in his mind, something like a haunted fear. Come to the next. A few years later, when I came to know the waters of the cascades, beautiful cascades, the waterfalls, I will show you the cascades. Look at the beautiful cascade waterfalls. When he heard about this beauty of this waterfall, he wanted to go there and enjoy it, but he couldn't because of the haunted fear in him. I wanted to get into them. He wanted to go there and get into this water. And whenever I did, whether I was wading this Titan, wading means walk through water. Walk through water. That is wading. And whenever he was wading the Titan, I will show you the Titan also here. Look at the Titan river. Many people go there for adventurous water sports. This is one of the dangerous stretch of the river. And he wanted to go and engage in the adventure sport, but he couldn't. Or the bumping river. Let us go and watch that bumping river also. This is the bumping river in USA, one of the beautiful, most attractive rivers in US. But the terror that had seized me in the pool would come back wherever he go, and whatever water sport he wanted to do, he couldn't, because the terror that had grasped him at the pool that would come back. It would take possession of me completely. My legs would become paralyzed. I see horror would grab my heart. So he couldn't enter in any water bodies. The moment he reached there, his legs would become paralyzed and his mind, his heart become icy with the horror. This handicap stayed with me as years rolled by. In cannons on many lakes, fishing for landlocked salmon, he couldn't do anything. Even a small boat like cannons, he couldn't do it in the water of main lakes. Or fishing like the landlocked salmon fish, he couldn't do any of these water sport. Look at Douglas's favorite landlocked salmon fish. He wanted to catch fishes like this, but he couldn't. So it remained as a handicapped with him.